Hello, everybody. Welcome back to this week. We are starting our book, Freedom of Self-Forgetfulness by Timothy Keller. I'm going to pass it off to one of our guest speakers, and we are going to be introducing this book.
Okay. As we go through this book, there's two questions that need to be answered individually because it's really the theme of the book. And the first question is, what are the marks of a heart that has been radically changed by the grace of God? That's question number one. Number two is, if we trust in Christ, what should our hearts be like? And I think as we go through each chapter, some of these answers I think will be more revealing. I want to move on. This book is focused on Paul's first letter to the Corinthians. So Lillian is going to read 1 Corinthians 3:21 through 4:7.
Alrighty. So here we go. So then, no more boasting about men. All things are yours, whether Paul or Apollos or Cephas or the world or life or death or the present or the future. All are yours, and you are of Christ, and Christ is of God. So then, men ought to regard us as servants of Christ and as those entrusted with the secret things of God. Now it is required that those who have been given a trust must prove faithful. I care very little if I am judged by you or by any human court. Indeed, I do not even judge myself. My conscience is clear, but that does not make me innocent. It is the Lord who judges me. Therefore, judge nothing before the appointed time. Wait till the Lord comes. He will bring to light what is hidden in darkness and will expose the motives of men's hearts. At that time, each will receive his praise from God. Now, brothers, I have applied these things to myself and Apollos for your benefit, so that you may learn from us the meaning of the saying, do not go beyond what is written. Then you will not take pride in one man over against another. For who makes you different from anyone else? What do you have that you did not receive? And if you did receive it, why do you boast as though you did not? So that was the 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 21, all the way through to chapter 4, verse 7. And we're just going to get started going through this chapter 1 and some of the key ideas. Alexis, do you want to read some of the key ideas here talking about this chapter?
Yeah, of course. So the key ideas that we want to keep in mind for this chapter is that the human ego is naturally self-centered and fragile. He uses this an example of a balloon or even like an organ, I think a distended organ. And he kind of gets more into how that can become fragile, and he relates it to the human ego. And then our culture's solution, which is boosting self-esteem, does not actually free us, which is something that we'll get more into as well. And then the gospel offers a third way, which is self-forgetfulness, which is the title of this book. Does not self-love or self-hate, which is a good topic for me. I'm excited to talk about that. And then Paul's teaching in first Epistile to the Corinthians framed true humility, and then talk about what was going on in the Corinthian church and Paul's specific use for the Greek word of pride, which I thought was really interesting. The definition of that pride is to be overinflated, swollen, distended beyond its proper size.
Yeah, great. Yeah, and kind of going with what you said about the Corinthian church. So in that time when this was being written, the Corinthian church was filled with division. This church had been planted by Paul, but there were also other people like Apollos and Cephas, these other evangelists who were in Corinth as well. And so as a result, these people at Corinth, at the Corinthian church, they knew Paul, some knew Apollos, some knew Cephas. And at that point, they were starting to be divisions. And the divisions were based on these people's relationships with Paul, Apollos, and Cephas and these teachers, instead of everyone just saying, oh, I know Paul. Like, oh, you know Paul, you know Apollos, you know Cephas. That's awesome. They were starting to say, oh, well, I know Paul and you don't. You only know Apollos. So I know more than you. I've been trained by Paul. And so there was this pride going on. There was this boasting of that they knew more prominent people than someone else. So it wasn't enough for them to simply know these great teachers who had been inspired by God. It was to the point where they wanted everyone to know that they knew Paul and these other people didn't. And there were these hierarchies that were being displayed. And that is not how the church should be functioning. We should not be putting people on these pedestals or saying we're better than someone else simply because we know the senior pastor or whoever it might be. So that's kind of what was going on there. And the word that Paul uses here, and the root for this root cause of the division, Paul says, is the pride and the boasting. In these verses, there's a lot that talks about the boasting and why are you trying to, fighting man against man about these things. And the word that Paul is using, let me get to that. The word that Paul uses here for pride is not the normal hubris word for pride. This is a Greek word, but this other word is physio. I don't know if I'm saying that right because I'm not Greek. But it looks like physio. And it's an unusual word that Paul uses here, and he uses it another 5 times in this particular book in 1 Corinthians, and then once in Colossians. And you're not going to find this word anywhere else in the Bible because it's only used by Paul. And this is a special theme of Paul. But by using this word, like Alexa said, that definition of overinflated, swollen, and distended beyond its size, that is what Paul is trying to get us to understand. This image, I don't know if you know what bellows are, but it's like these big things that you use to like start fires or something or put air on something, and they get really big and puffy, and then you blow all the air out. But he's kind of comparing it to that, like or a balloon, a really fat balloon that you know is about to pop because it's too full of air.
Yes.
So that's kind of what he's talking about. So do you want to go over the first? Because Keller describes the ego as empty, painful, busy, and fragile. Do you want to go over the emptiness?
Yeah, so the emptiness is one that really stood out to me. I think we'll go over it when we get into the discussion, but he talks about how when the ego is empty, he uses a balloon or a distended organ. But I'm going to use the balloon metaphor. And it's that he explains the ego is basically never satisfied. So that balloon is blowing up and it's very big and it's over full. But the true meaning of it is that the inside is empty. So now we got this really extended or distended balloon and it's empty. So it's kind of like describing that pride where you're overfilling yourself, but it's of nothingness almost.
Mm-hmm.
So he explains that no matter how much praise or achievement or recognition we do receive, the sense of worth quickly fades away. Like a bottomless pit, honestly, the ego always wants more. And so that balloon, that emptiness is the bottomless pit or the almost greed you can put into it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
for sure.
On that same note, if any of you have been listening to our Thursday study of Ecclesiastes, you would start to understand what this word empty means, because Solomon in that chapter talked about how empty, and to put things in perspective, Solomon, if we put him in modern day net worth, he'd be worth somewhere between $2.5 to $3 trillion. So he was given everything. But even in spite of that, he still comes out and claims that it was all worthless. It was all meaningless outside of God. And I kind of picked that up when I was reading the emptiness.
But the key idea here is that the ego it's always hungry. You always got an empty stomach or a big balloon with air filled inside. And this is why the accomplishments, the compliments, and the success provide only the temporary relief from insecurity. Getting into some discussion questions, why do achievements or praise lose their power so quickly?
I think it's just they come and go. They don't last. You can be praised for, a good test that you had, or you've got a promotion at work or something. You can be praised for it, but then it just goes away.
Mhm.
It's like you forget about it in a week.
Yep.
And so there's no lasting value to it.
Mhm.
It kind of just goes in and out. And yeah, I think
Right.
yeah.
And when we tie our almost kind of like our self-worth to it,
or our
and
identity.
it goes away so
Mhm.
fast, we feel like we're nothingness
Yeah.
or we're worthless.
Mhm.
I kind of see it like a dopamine hit. You get that dopamine hit,
Yeah.
and it goes away, but then you're like, well, I want that dopamine hit again. That felt good.
Mhm.
And almost like an addiction, you want more and more and more,
Mhm.
and you kind of feed into that greed.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Another question is, how does our culture encourage us to try to fill this empty ego?
Yeah, I think trying to make as much money as you can,
Yeah.
be successful, be more successful than the person next to you.
Mhm.
There's that phrase we use all the time, keeping up with the Joneses.
Yep.
Always try to you keep up with the best one in town, try to be their equal or better than them.
Mhm.
You could use alcohol, sex, money, whatever it might be,
Yep.
any of those things, because that's what we want. We think that's going to fulfill us.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Another thing that I put is when somebody's like, I think he mentioned it in the book, when somebody's down or you're trying to help somebody with advice, we always say, maybe it's time to focus on ourselves. Or we give them the option to go to therapy, which is focusing on ourselves. And that's kind of like the opposite of what Keller is trying to say is when we focus on ourselves or when we focus on what others think of ourselves, we get into that almost anxious state of mind. So I think that's something our culture kind of does, is over-encourage to think of ourselves.
Oh. Okay, we're back.
We're back. We had a technical problem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think what she's wanting in the culture today, we look at people that have got major problems, criminals, drug addiction, promiscuity, things like that. And we're thinking that these people have low self-esteem. But she's finding there's really no correlation between low self-esteem and high self-esteem. Rather, it's just we are who we are as individuals. And from a biblical standpoint, we live in a fallen world. And as living in a fallen world, we're all prone to either looking at ourselves highly or thinking we don't have much worth at all. So I just wanted to mention that because I thought that study was fairly interesting to me.
Yeah.
Yes.
It was very interesting. Yes. The second characteristic of the ego is that it's painful. And I'm just going to read a section from the book on page 16. He says, the ego often hurts. And that is, he actually starts with that. Have you ever thought about the fact that you do not notice your body until there's something wrong with it? And he talks about how when we're walking around, we're not thinking about our toes or our elbows and how those are functioning because they're not in pain. But if our elbow was in pain, if we just hit our funny bone or something, then we're like, wow, my elbow really hurts. So he's comparing that to the ego. And the reason that it hurts is because there is something wrong with it, something unbelievably wrong with it. He says it is always drawing attention to itself. It does so every single day. It is always making us think about how we look and how we are treated. People sometimes say their feelings are hurt, but our feelings cannot be hurt, actually. It's the ego that hurts. My sense of self, my identity. Our feelings are fine. It is my ego that hurts. And I think that's just such an interesting thing to think about, that we're basing someone's critique of us, whether it's positive or negative.
Mm-hmm.
We're using that as a sense of identity, which I think is a really scary thing because we know the power of our words.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's just so fascinating.
No, it very much was. I highlighted that entire section.
Yeah. And so, he says the ego's hurting because it's constantly comparing itself to others. We're always measuring, am I smarter? Am I more successful? Am I more respected? And this ongoing comparison produces anxiety, envy, pride, and insecurity. And a key idea here that I think he's trying to get across is that self-focus leads to emotional pain. Mm-hmm. Even when we win our comparisons, I'm better than that person because I got a better grade or a better work performance or whatever. The relief is temporary and it's fragile. Mm-hmm. Ken has more to say.
I just have a question for these two ladies.
Okay.
How do you respond to corrective criticism?
In my current stance, I encourage criticism, someone to give me criticism. I want to know what I can do to do better, or what I did good so I can honestly improve on it the next time.
Yeah.
Good.
I cry, personally. I really hate being corrected, and I am so guilty of what Keller's talking about, of this. I am tying my identity, my sense of who I am, in what someone thinks of me. And so when I get criticized on something that I thought I did okay in, I'm destroyed, and I just go cry because I feel horrible. But it's because I'm feeling this hurt and pain because I have been so self-absorbed in what I'm doing and what it looks like to other people and putting on this good show, that when that's gone, it just crumbles. Mm-hmm. So that is where I am. I do struggle with that. And I am constantly asking the Lord to remind me that I do not need to be that focused and that my identity is in Him. My identity is in Jesus. It's not in what I can do, because my salvation is not based on what I've done. It's based on what Jesus has done for me by dying on the cross. And so I am always confessing to God on how selfish I'm being and how self-focused I am, when He has been so selfless with me. And so, that's a good question. How do you respond, Ken?
I'm the master of defensiveness. I process things, but my initial reaction usually is, I've messed up. It's always kind of self-introspective, where you always look at where you failed. And many times it's not so much what you failed in doing, and I think maybe it's the birthright. But I think for me, it's just a case of I'm less than. And I can, I can go back to my childhood and I can defend it, but I don't need to defend it, but I do sometimes, of how I was raised and the community I was raised in, that you can never quite do anything right. But if my wife was here, she would say defensive. We just had that discussion last night,
Oh no.
Oh man, so this is fresh.
every moment.
All right. Well, I think that was a good discussion on that. So,
Yes.
Alexis, do you want to go over the third characteristic?
So Keller goes into the ego then being busy. What he means by that is it's always working. So when we are comparing and we're constantly thinking of what people think of ourselves, monitoring, evaluating, defending, and promoting itself, it describes the inner courtroom where we're always on trial, trying to prove that we are worth it, honestly. And that's something I can relate to, especially when it comes to dancing, because I was in competitive dancing for a few years.
Wow.
And a lot of the time, when you're in that room with everybody, there's certain people who can do certain skills, or they can do more turns than you can. And the teachers are like, wow, look at what they can do. And so it was constant competition. It was constant busyness. And I can relate everything into that point in my life. But the ego never rests is really a true thing. And that's what I think his key idea is that our ego never gets a break because it's in pain, it's overextended, it's empty, and that causes it to be busy. It produces the overthinking that we all think of, especially when I'm in competition dancing. That's what I'm always thinking of, is what the teachers are thinking of me when I'm dancing, or what the other girls are thinking of me. And then when I would get these critiques, I would constantly think of not only myself, but they did, but the other person, but this. And I would always think of what the other person was doing, and I would get this defensiveness, because almost look at what I did, recognize what I did. And so there was that defensiveness there. And then what follows into it is the people pleasing, where you do certain things, or I go home and I practice a certain skill, but not for myself, but for somebody else to recognize. And it's painful at the end of the day, but it goes away. Like he talks about, it's temporary, but it causes so much stress in your life at one point. And then image management, which kind of goes into all of it. At the end, it just kind of, you build yourself up with all this pride, and so now you have more to lose. And so when you lose it,
It's even
you
worse.
really feel that pain.
Man.
that image of yourself just kind of completely deteriorates.
It's kind of a summary of the anxious generation that we just went through,
Yeah.
where everything is focused on me and I.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been real cognizant of that the last 2 weeks, how often I use I and me. And it's rather disturbing
Mm-hmm.
because, and a lot of it is how we have been raised, especially if you grew up in the Midwest, because in the Midwest, we've either come out of a German, Irish, Swiss background, and there's an ethic that you're always expected to do more and more and more. That I know if you missed honor roll in school, it was just very deflating. And I just think that competitiveness keeps us so busy. It's ongoing. It's almost 24/7 because it's whether it's at work, whether it's at home, whether you ladies are on social media. So whether it's Facebook or TikTok, I mean, there's always that constant judging you against people that by and large you don't even know, but you're influenced by them.
Before we get into some discussion, what you said, like that competitiveness, there in the book, there's a famous chapter, on pride, and it's in Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. He points out that pride by nature is competitiveness. And it's the very heart of pride. He says pride gets no pleasure out of having something, only out of having more than the next person. We say that people are proud of being rich or clever or good looking, but they are not. They're proud of being richer or cleverer or better looking than others. If everyone else became equally rich or clever or good looking, there would be nothing to be proud about. And that's something that really stuck out to
Yeah, I just want to add, from a Christian perspective, we find that so often in the Christian community, where depending on maybe what denomination you have grown up in, there can be a sense that you're more spiritual than someone who went to a lesser church in your mind, and I think it's really a huge sin, because when we get into the spiritual realm and we start to evaluate and assess other people's faith, I think we've crossed over a line that when we have our final exam, we'll give an account to. So just from the Christian perspective, not from a worldly perspective, but I'm just looking at it from a Christian perspective. We in the Christian community, we have a long way to go.
I want to get into a discussion question before going on to the fourth term, and that is, why is it exhausting to live for the approval of others? And we kind of touched on it as we talked.
Yeah, I think living for the approval of others, I think, again, for me, it goes back to self-identity, self-worth. Because I know for a long time I've lived in that for approval for others mode of, I'm living this way or doing these things or being involved in these different things because I want people to see me. I want people to see that I am a better Christian by participating in the worship, like leading the worship at my church or being involved with the kids ministry. That has definitely been something that I've had to surrender and work through, because living like that, it takes so much effort to keep up that picture and image. And then when I do mess up, maybe if I'm, not being very intentional in reading my Bible, and I'm like, oh, but I still have to put out this image that I'm doing good, then I'm just being a hypocrite. So it's like there's no winning in this situation.
No, I fully understand. And I think the most exhausting part of it is the competition of it, because like you mentioned, keeping up with the Joneses it's a real thing you see a lot. And when I've been in that area, let me think, just like in my current state, like if I was really good at a topic and I messed up that topic, I allow myself grace for it, but I still justify it in my head. Like, what if somebody thinks less of me? And then I'm like, well, they think less of me, then I can just say this. But I still have that thought of what somebody else is thinking of me. And I base kind of my emotion on what other people think of me sometimes. Yeah. And that's something I'm really trying to work on, because it is exhausting. Yeah.
It takes way too much effort. Effort, honestly, I don't have time for.
Right.
And there's a verse here from Galatians chapter 1, verse 10, says, am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? Or am I trying to please people? If I were still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ. And that's kind of like that kind of hits me right in the heart. Because that really says who I care more about. Do I care more about the people around me and what they think? Or do I care more about God's opinion of me and what God thinks of me? He's the one who created me. He's the one who created us. So why would I be more concerned about someone else's opinion than the one who created me?
And it makes so much sense. But like we've said before, it's like something coming forth and putting it in your face for it to actually click in your head.
I think when we look at that verse, I think we have to recognize that probably the origin of pride comes from a rebellion originating in the garden. and it was thinking that we know better than God who created us. And I think that's that fallen nature that we consistently are battling and will continue to battle until we're with the Lord. But I think that competitiveness also, well, it's destructive.
Yeah.
It is very destructive. The last characteristic of the ego we're going to talk about is that it is fragile. Keller says in his book on page 20, and lastly, as well as empty and painful and busy, the ego is fragile. That is because anything that is overinflated is in imminent danger of being deflated, like an overinflated balloon. We all know when we're blowing up a balloon and we're like, oh, that was one puff too much. And it's really, really big and it might explode.
Yep.
That's what he's comparing this fragile ego to, that at any point something could happen to make it burst.
Right.
And if we're puffed up by air and not filled up with something solid, then to be overinflated or deflated comes down to the same thing. There's a danger there.
Yep.
Because question.
Yes.
For you ladies.
Yes.
What's the difference between the ego is fragile and the ego is painful? What are the responses that would be different from that?
I think when the ego is painful and the ego is like it's hurt is what it's, the idea of there. I think in that time is when we go searching for, we have that we have that greed, and we're going to search for more praise or accomplishment within ourselves, or we go to try and prove ourselves in some way, but for somebody else's recognition, so we can then feel good about ourselves again. And then being fragile, it kind of goes hand in hand, because once that balloon's popped and we have lost all of our pride, that's when it's painful, and that's when you're going out and seeking that recognition, that positive recognition. So I think it has a tie in that way. But I don't necessarily think it's the same thing, but I do think they work closely together.
Okay. Second question is, after the pride is broken, then you feel like a snail. How is that different than being overly inflated? Your response, how's your response different?
So it kind of talks about the superiority complex in there, and then when you have that superiority complex, you're like, I don't know. It's kind of like you're trying to protect. In my case, I'm trying to protect my pride. Like, I'm trying not to do anything that's going to compromise the pride I already have. So I don't know how to necessarily answer this. I don't know if I'm more careful about what I do, or like I'm trying to constantly stay on top of keeping up with the Joneses, basically. And then the inferiority. I was practicing that word today. I just couldn't do it.
That's okay.
The inferiority complex. That's when people tell them that they hate themselves. It's different because now you almost don't have anything to lose. And I put that in quotation marks because this is all based on the terms that we use today. But now we don't have much to lose. And in my perspective, I wouldn't be protecting much anymore. I don't know necessarily how to explain that, but there's nothing left to lose. So it's almost like you can go into that rebellion stage. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but.
Got another question, probably more for you, Alexis and Lillian, because you weren't involved with. As we were going through the fall, we spent an enormous amount of time on setting boundaries to protect ourselves.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, are we protecting ourselves or are we protecting our ego?
Yeah. I think I think in some situations, there's boundaries that protect ourselves, but I think a lot of the time they're set up to protect our ego and that superiority complex that we have.
Well, I think they're set up to support our self-worth.
Yeah.
And our self-worth is not what he's talking about here.
Okay. Yeah.
I just, because we spent so much time talking about boundaries for like 2.5 months. And then after reading this book, it just kind of hit me that how many of those boundaries are just artificially set up to protect my self-worth or my ego, when that's what needs to be broken down is my ego.
I understand what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't know how to answer it very well.
Well, if we go back and we read Colossians 2:10, it's not in this study, but it just keeps coming to my mind as I've read through this book, is it says, in Christ we're made complete. Where the fullness of Christ, the fullness of the Holy Spirit is in us and is upon us. So my question continues to be, if the fullness of Christ and the Holy Spirit indwells in us, why is it so difficult to protect ourselves, our pride, our ego? If we already have the fullness of him in us, it doesn't get any better than that. I mean, he's not giving us 75%. He's giving us his total self.
I would say that, like Timothy Keller says, there's something inherently wrong with our ego. We have it is overinflated, and that is our problem. That's where that rebellion comes in from the beginning. When Adam and Eve thought they knew better, that's that pride and puffed upness that Proverbs talks about. The problem is our sin. Yes, if we are in Christ, we're made complete. We don't need anything else. But our sinful nature keeps wanting to protect us and have something to bring to God, something that we can say, oh, this is why he loves me. I've done this for him. Performance-based, which is exactly opposite to the gospel, because it's not performance. It's based on the performance of what Jesus has done, not what we have done. So I think that's the whole problem, is that our ego we can't fix it here. It won't be fixed until we're in heaven. But we keep trying to protect ourselves because our sin is trying to grasp onto something that makes us feel like we have earned something. We have earned our salvation. We've earned our worth. We've earned our identity in Christ, when there is nothing to grasp onto except the grace of God. And so I think that is the in my mind, that's where I'm landing on.
No, that makes total sense.
Hopefully it does.
That wasn't one of the original questions.
Well, there we go.
Came to my mind.
No, that's good. We need this spontaneity to keep us sharp.
Yeah, honestly.
Okay, so now we're going to get into the ego is fragile. The ego is easily bruised. It's built on performance and comparison. Therefore, it is easily wounded because our performance will vary based on our actions and behaviors. Criticism, failure, or being overlooked can quickly destabilize us. And this fragility explains why criticism feels so threatening. For me, it does feel very threatening. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is attacking my character when someone is giving me, even if it's constructive, good criticism that I need. I think they're attacking my character. And that's something I have to continually surrender. It's why we become,
go ahead.
It's why we become defensive, and why we feel like success has to be constantly maintained. We have to always be going up. We can't ever fall down. Otherwise, our whole life is over.
I think what's real evident with this, what you're talking about, Lillian, is, and you guys you're young and you haven't started a career yet. But when you start a permanent job and you have to sit through evaluations or assessments every 6 months, it really comes full tilt on just the frailty of yourself
Mhm.
and how you seek to justify yourself.
Mhm.
It always comes back to that.
Yeah.
It's just rationalization most of the time.
Right. Okay, so we're just gonna go over 3 questions here for this last part, and then we'll probably end it after that. Um, the first one is, which word stood out most to you and why? Of the 4 characteristics of the ego, we have empty, busy, fragile, and painful. Which one most stood out to you, or is most you can most relate to or understand the best?
His first term, I think I mentioned it when I went over it, is being empty. It stood out to me because of the metaphor he used, like I previously mentioned, is the balloon being inflated and it's overinflating. You got such a big balloon, you've puffed all this air into it.
with
but
your
the
with
meaning
your
on the
accomplishments,
inside-
right?
Right. But the meaning on the inside is there's nothing in there. It's just filled with air. He kind of compares it to a balloon completely filled. So if it popped, no, it's not going to deflate. But now that this balloon, it's so full, it can pop and it can completely deflate. And something about when he explained that to me, it kind of clicked in my head that trying to overachieve kind of equals nothingness when it comes to my identity and who I am. So that word just stuck out to me.
Yeah. I think the fragile was the one that really got to me because I just know how quickly I am like falling apart when I get criticized. And it's, I'm not ashamed of it because that's just, I'm thankful that God is revealing where I need to grow.
Kind of like holding the pencil.
Oh my gosh. I was holding a pencil. I was writing stuff earlier and Ken looks at me and he goes, you hold that pencil like it's a crayon, like someone's going to take it away from you. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, that's just how I hold my pencil. And he was criticizing me of that. And in that instance, in that instance, I did not cry, but it did make me think, like, why do I hold it like that? Anyway. Okay. Yes. So yeah, fragile. I know how quickly I'm discouraged when I'm criticized.
Yeah.
Number 3, what does Keller mean when he says gospel humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less?
So he kind of mentions in here that you don't overly love yourself or overly hate yourself. It's kind of like that basis of being neutral. The way I've heard it be explained to me is like when 2 people are in a debate, like politics. Politics is a big controversy right now. And a lot of the time when you find 2 people disagreeing, it's almost like complete hatred. Right? We cannot talk to each other, be in the same room. We can't be neutral. And so this is like being neutral with yourself. Even though there's some good, there's some bad, you can still, at the end of the day, come back to yourself and be neutral with yourself because those things don't define your identity.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah. I wrote, I don't need to perform for others. People are not so concerned with me as I am with me.
Yeah.
Because, they're not thinking less of yourself. So we talked about before about like getting in those pits of self-hatred and these spirals of just hating ourselves and saying all these lies about ourselves. So it's not doing that because I know I've done that before. But yeah, like you said, it's genuinely saying, yes, I have sin that I need to deal with. And then I've also been saved by Jesus. So I have these 2 things, but I am defined by Jesus and by salvation. I'm not defined by this sin. And so I can act and behave in a way that is not falling off this end, but not saying, oh, I'm so good in all this.
Right.
I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does. I get it.
Okay, in Philippians 2:3, it says, do nothing out of self-ambition or conceit, but in humility consider others more important than yourself. And I think in the culture we live in, it's such a meism culture that until we are filled, we have a tendency not to think of the other person. And I think the one thing that's helped over the years, and a lot of it's the way I was raised, is thinking more about the other person and how they're going to feel or respond. And not in all cases, but in several cases, you find yourself retracting from what you were originally going to say or to them. I think a lot of it is just thinking more highly of others than ourselves.
Doesn't that just kind of tie into like the saying we always hear, treat others the way you want to be treated? Not necessarily for others to treat you that way, but just kind of like a reflection of, God is within, and so treating people basically how you want to be treated, but not in that aspect of thinking of yourself.
You could even say treat people better than you want to be treated.
Yeah.
Like making a standard that you're going to treat other people better than even what you can think would be how I would want to be treated.
Right.
But setting that standard higher for them and and then of course, God has, I think he might have talked about it in chapter 1 or chapter 2, I don't remember, but he's kind of talking about how much God has done. Oh no, I read it in my devotion this morning. That's where I read it. That God has done so much for us when we hated him, when we were not looking for him. He did so much for us by coming and dying on the cross for us and saving us from our sin, that the author talked about how we have no room to talk of saying, oh, well, this person doesn't treat me nicely, or when I do this, then they do this, and they don't appreciate me. It's like God did so much for us and we didn't appreciate any of it.
Right.
So we have no room to speak when someone treats us wrongly. We have a responsibility to treat them just as well as Christ has treated us.
Okay.
I think that kind of ends it.
Yeah. Is that all for our discussion for today?
I think so.
Okay. Does that mean tomorrow we're going to jump into chapter 2?
No, I think there's a few things we can still touch on in chapter 1.
Okay.
It may not take a half hour, but I still think there's a few things that and it wasn't that we overlooked them. It's just, I think there can be a little bit more discussion on some of this.
Okay. So tomorrow we're going to follow up with chapter 1. We're going to get more into discussion, get more in depth in some of these points to kind of tie off chapter 1. And then next week we will get into chapter 2. Again, this is The Freedom of Self-Forgetfulness by Timothy Keller. I'm glad you guys could sit and be entertained for the last 47 minutes. And I hope you can take something from this today. I appreciate you listening, and I'll see you next week.